So today, the USA got a new president, Donald Trump, who replaced the outgoing president, Joe Biden. Personally, I'm glad to see the back of Joe Biden, as I think the Biden administration's foreign policy was a disaster. Together with his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, they created much turmoil around the world. Wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, sanctions on numerous countries, and overthrowing governments of sovereign nations. They also stirred up trouble in the South China Sea and were very confrontational towards China. It will be very interesting to see how Trump conducts his foreign policy, as in his speech he says he wants to promote peace. We will wait and see. However, I think his words are at least a step in the right direction. As soon as he was inaugurated, Trump signed a whole bunch of executive orders. Let's now go through those orders that he has signed, and later in the video I'll talk about how I think Trump's appointment will affect China. It's not an extensive list, but covers many of the main ones. Firstly, he has withdrew the US from the Paris Climate Agreement. As we know, Trump is a big proponent of American fossil fuel energy, and he intends to extract as much as this as possible from American soil, fill up the strategic reserves, then export as much as possible. He sees this as a way of bringing large revenue into the US. In his speech, he mentioned that China was the largest polluter. In absolute terms, that is indeed the case. However, on a per capita basis, which is far more sensible measure, the US are far bigger polluters than China. China are also leading the world by a massive margin in their transition to clean energy. No other nation comes close. He has withdrew the US from the World Health Organization. China have already made a statement saying they will continue to support the WHO, and it's likely that they will increase their financial contribution to somewhat offset what the WHO will lose from the USA. He will deliver emergency price relief consistent with applicable law to the American people and increase the prosperity of the American worker. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work in practice. If you know, leave a comment. A temporary freeze on government hiring until the Trump administration is fully in place in order to cut costs. He wishes to cut the amount of government workers. End all remote working for all government employees. I think this is something that has been encouraged by Elon Musk. End the weaponization of the federal government. This is something that was used against Trump by the Biden administration, and he's very keen to stop it happening again. Restore freedom of speech and end federal censorship. This is something that was highlighted when Elon Musk purchased Twitter and released the Twitter files. There was a huge amount of censorship happening by federal agencies. The reversal of 78 of Biden's executive orders. So basically overturning a bunch of stuff Biden did. I don't know any of the details of what these were. If you know, leave a comment. Granting a pardon to all the people charged or convicted relating to the events at the Capitol building on the 6th of January 2021. Extending the TikTok deadline for 75 days in order to give more time to try and work out some sort of deal. Interestingly, in his last term, he wanted TikTok banned. However, he is now more favourable to TikTok, as it played a big part in his election campaign, winning over the vote of younger people. He's proposing some sort of joint ownership where a US company owns 50%. I'm not sure how this will play out. However, the Chinese government has said the decision is down to ByteDance, TikTok's parent company. Holding former officials accountable for election interference. He has taken away security clearance for the 51 CIA agents who spread misinformation about the Hunter Biden laptop. Interestingly, he singled out John Bolton. According to some people, this will have a big impact on the deep state. Declaring a national emergency at the southern border and deporting millions of illegals. This will include the continuation of building the wall, which was started in his first term. He also says he will deploy the military to the south border. The US has had huge problems with millions of illegals flowing across its southern border for many years. He also signed off on an order to recognise only 2 genders in the US government. I think this is a good thing, as I think this multi-gender nonsense in society was really getting somewhat out of hand. Trump has signed an executive order temporarily suspending all US foreign assistance programs for 90 days, pending reviews to determine their alignment with his policy goals. I do wonder whether this will also apply to Israel and Ukraine, though. And finally, one that will have the most impact on China, the American First Trade Policy. Now, as the leader of a country, you should always put the interests of your country and your people first, something that I feel the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, isn't doing. However, as we know, in the last few years, the US has moved from a country who always embraced free trade to a country that has become much more protectionist. So much so that I now think it is becoming isolated and causing US companies and companies of its foreign allies like South Korea and Japan harm. This has been especially true in the technology sector, as the US has put pressure on China to try and slow China's technological rise. There is, however, now mounting evidence that this is backfiring on the US. It will be interesting to see how Trump approaches trade with China. Will he roll back any of Biden's sanctions? Trump at heart is a businessman. He likes doing deals. He will be under pressure from the CEOs of these tech companies. Will he act? He's obviously a big fan of trade tariffs. He sees this as a way of raising tax revenue. However, this ultimately is paid by US businesses and consumers. However, Trump is setting up a new external tax agency to collect these taxes. Will he use this agency to then direct the revenue to targeted sectors in the US economy to offset the effects of these tariffs? He has pledged additional tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico, and in fact any country that moves away from using the US dollar. China have said that they are open to negotiations and that both China and the US must have mutual respect for each other's development. Trump has indicated that he wants to meet with Xi Jinping as soon as possible and has indicated that they can work together to bring more peace to the world. Let's hope so. I think China will find it easier to work with Donald Trump than they did Joe Biden. I think with Trump, they probably know where they are a bit more, as Trump tends to be more straight in his talking. Biden tended to say one thing and then do something else, as this was actually picked up by Xi Jinping in one of his statements. I do think we're in for a very interesting first few months, so buckle up and I'll see you in the next one.